Welcome everybody. This video will go over the vector cartoon exercise in Gravit. So here we are in Gravit, and I'm gonna, as usual, go to a new design, not bother to input anything, and hit create. And that brings me into the main Gravit window. From here, I'm going to open up my reference. So for this exercise, I want you to take a sketch, and you can use my sketch or you can do your own. And you're going to open it into Gravit, and we're going to render that sketch into a vector style piece of art. So I'm going to go open local file here. And I'm going to find my reference sketch. All right, so this is Max the Goldfish. And you can use this sketch or you can do your own. But regardless, you're going to open it up in the same way. You're going to import it into Gravit, and then you'll notice it appears in your layers. So you've got this image layer. I'm going to go ahead and lock that layer so that it doesn't move around while I'm drawing. Next, I'm going to grab the pen tool. And this is going to be my main tool for creating this drawing. And I'm essentially going to use it to trace the edges of the existing sketch. Now, to make this a little easier, I'm going to grab the zoom here, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. Alright, and how zoomed in you want to go depends on comfort. You can play with the values until you find something which works. But basically you want to be zoomed in enough that you can clearly see and control your curves. So now I'm going to the pen tool, and I'm going to start on a corner somewhere. It really doesn't matter. I just don't want to start in the middle of a curve. So I'm going to find some kind of place that makes sense to me at the edge of a line, and that's where I'm going to start my trace here. Alright, so I'm starting with a point, and going along this curve here, I'm going to try to put my next point somewhere in the middle of that curve. And because it is a curve and not a straight line, instead of clicking, I'm dragging. And by dragging, I'm pulling out these Bezier handles that allow me to control this curve. Now, going over to this point, this is kind of the end of that curve, so I'm not going to add a curve here. I'm going to add a point instead, just a straight point. And then when I go up here, here's another curve. All right, so I'm aiming for the middle of that curve. I'm dragging out a Bezier handle, and then I'm letting go, and then I'm going and just adding a point here because I don't want that to curve. I want that to bend back. And basically this is the process that you follow from here on out. You go along, you add points where you want things to be sharp, and you add curves where you want things to be curvy. Now, if you make a mistake and you want to make a curve into a sharp point instead, there's a little trick. You can kind of click on the point again, and that will shave off the edge of that curve so that you can change it into a sharp edge. And then your next point, you could do a curve or a point or whatever works. Okay. Now, exactly how you navigate these lines is up to you. I'm kind of going to do everything in sections. So here I'm kind of going and doing this fin, and then I'm just going to stop, and then I'm going to recontinue later on. So at this point, I'm just kind of stopping. And maybe at this point, I'm going to take a look and maybe make my line a little thicker so it's easier to see. You could even work in a different color if that helps. And that's pretty good, so I'm going to keep going. But if at any point you need to fix something, like you have a point that went off or something like that, that's when sub-select comes in handy. So that's the white arrow here. And you can go in any points that are a little off or curves that didn't quite balance out. Rather than redrawing it completely, you can just go and you can modify those points until you're happy with them, which is great. All right, so I'm going back to my pen tool, and I'm basically continuing my lines. So again, I'm kind of aiming for finding those ends and then the kind of curve in between and spacing it out. Notice that I did all that with just like 3 points, and that's kind of what you want to aim for, as few points as possible. You don't want to clutter up your line with a lot of little ones, because then it will be rougher, it will be much harder to edit. And again, I'm just going to make my line a little thicker. Alright, and now I'm going to this one, and I'm going to curve it up here, and here, and here. Alright, so you're getting the idea. And when you want to end a line, I find it's easiest just to click up and do... Oh, I don't need that. Alright, so I'm working away, and at this point I'll probably just kind of speed up and take you through all the line process, and then we will reconnect once I've got all the lines done. Okay, so I'm almost there, but one more thing to mention. If you encounter any areas in your sketch where you have simple kind of shapes that might work better as a shape and not a line, for example, the eyes are pretty much an ellipse, so rather than trying to draw that with the pen tool, I'm just going to jump over to the ellipse tool instead and draw his little pupils here. With this tool. Make sure if it's not already set, you may want to take away a fill, any fill that might be on that ellipse, and make sure that there's a border instead. And then, of course, you can make the border thicker or thinner as usual. Another thing I should mention is that if you have multiple things that you require a copy of, rather than, again, drawing it again and again, for example, I did this on the scales here, all you need to do is either copy paste or hit duplicate. And if you remember, duplicate is Control D, so you can use that shortcut to simply copy and then drag any elements that are kind of similar enough in size that you can replicate them. Now here's where we get to the tricky part. Let's say I want to color Max here. There's not an obvious way to do this. For example, if you select all your lines that you've drawn so far and try to add a fill to them, you'll notice that, well, it doesn't really work. What happens instead is each line gets a fill, and wherever the line isn't connected, it just basically kind of creates like a random jag of color kind of in the middle of everything. So obviously that isn't going to work. I'm just going to undo here. So instead we have to apply a different process. And this is one of the things that unfortunately Gravit isn't as good as Illustrator for. Illustrator does have a sort of paint bucket tool that you can use to get around this issue. However, for us stuck in Gravit, we've got to approach it in a different way. And this is essentially a way that illustrates the difference between vector programs and the stuff we're going to be doing with like something like Photopea later. Basically, if you want something to have a color in Gravit, you need to draw it specifically as a shape. And that's not what I've done. I've drawn lines. So the only thing that I can fill in here easily are the pupils. So I can go ahead and do that. I can add a fill to those. make them whatever color I want. But for everything else, I'm going to have to approach a different process. Okay, and to set up my drawing for that process, I'm going to go and create a new layer. And this is actually going to be a folder. So it's basically a higher top layer than all the rest of my stuff that's sitting in here. And it allows me to group things kind of in larger chunks. So I'm going to take and select all these layers that are currently in here, all my various lines. And I'm going to put them in that folder just by dragging them in there. All right. So now basically I have this group of layers. All right, there we go. That's my layer 0. And the only thing that's not in there is the actual reference image in the back. All right, which if I turn that off for a second, you can see just the lines that we've drawn. And now with this group, I'm going to lock that. Okay, because I don't want to now be I don't want to be able to move around these lines that we've done. I'm gonna make a new group, and I'm gonna kind of sandwich it in between. And the stuff we're gonna draw in this new group is gonna be the colors. So we're actually gonna draw the colors as shapes and place them where we want them. So for example, to do a color inside an eye, I'm going to go and I'm actually going to draw an eye shape. And for this shape, I'm going to trace over kind of lines that I've already done. But I'm only going to care about the lines that conform to where the color is going to be. All right. And if there's any discrepancy in the lines, just make sure that your fill lines will be covered up by the other lines. Okay, so I'm going to go all the way around and I'm going to connect back to the last point that I was at. And I'm going to take off the border so there's no border on this shape and there's just a fill. All right. So if you've drawn your lines okay, you shouldn't see the fill like poking out from the lines. But if that happens, you can go grab the sub-select. So for example, if you see this happening at all where the color is sticking out from the lines, just kind of grab that point and move it in. All right, so this is basically the difference between a vector program and something else. Instead of plopping my fills in nice and easily, I'm actually drawing my fills as separate shapes. And this is going to feel really annoying at first when you do this because you're having to redraw over places, but ultimately you're going to get a very easily to control set of fills that are easy to change afterwards. So it does have its advantages. You really have to be deliberate where you put your fills and figure out where they should go. And because they can operate independently of lines, that can have some unique properties. Now, it looks like the thing I was drawing went out of my layer. I've just got to readjust that. So make sure that if any paths pop out of where you're drawing to, make sure they stay underneath layer 0, which is your top level lines. Okay, so if anything pops above there, I'm going to drag all my other ones down here when I'm done. Just make sure that they stay under layer 0. All right, so I'm going to speed things up and I'm going to go draw fills around the whole body, and I'm going to do maybe a couple of the fins separately so I can color them separately. The things that I'm actually going to do separately here are I'm going to make some separate shapes for shadows. I'll do more of these once I'm done the basics, but a few I'm going to make different from the start. I'm going to make the fin different from the start, and I'm going to make this kind of back fin part of the fin a different fill from the start, just because it's easier than trying to do it later. All right, this one I'm just going to do as a whole, and then I'm going to split it. I'll show you that in a bit. Okay, so now that I've got my main fills in place, there's a couple other things that you can do. One is that, first of all, if you encountered any kind of problems with things like layering, go kind of check out those layers now. Make sure that all your fill layers are underneath your line layer. So that's my line layer. I'm going to put all my fill layers into this other middle layer. So that's my fill, and this is my line. And make sure that your fills themselves are in the order that you want. If you want certain ones underneath or over top of each other, just kind of check that. And then the other thing you can do at this stage is you can think about if you want shadows. So I'm just going to throw in a couple simple shadows. I already have a suggestion of shadow here in that the fins that are kind of further back on his body are a bit darker. You can go even further than this and actually split apart some of these fills with the knife tool. So there's the knife tool and the freehand shaping tool. If you want a bit more of a curve, you can use the freehand shaping. But basically what you can do is you can actually kind of chop lines at certain points. I think I'm just going to use straight up knife here. Yeah, there we go. And what that will let you do is it will let you color that other chopped place independently. So that's one way to get around this having to like draw new shapes for every fill. If you have something that you can easily break up, you can use the knife tool to separate them so that they have separate colors. And that can be a way to create like steps of shading, because you can go and kind of subdivide these places and then just change the color of them a little darker each time and create like a sense of like depth or shading. So you can play with that aspect of it, or you can keep things flat. But basically anywhere where you want a little sense of shadow, you can go in and add additional fills. So let's say I want a little bit of a shadow here. Make sure I don't have a border, but I do have some sort of shadow. And you want to think out kind of what the color of your shadows. We're doing a goldfish here, so I'm just going to choose kind of like a darker orange to be my shadows. And again, if you have simpler shapes, you could even throw a bit of simple shape tools in there to create shadows as well. I could do a little shadow underneath the bulge of his mouth here. No border color. Yeah, like that. And basically kind of proceed from there. So I'm going to go and add a few more shadows in places, and I'll speed up through that. I'll also mention that when doing fills, there's also this eyedrop icon. So if you want to match a color with a color that's already in your design, you can do that pretty easily just by using the color picker. That won't show up until you're kind of in the fill here, but it's right there. But there is a little eyedropper icon right beside the circle as well. Another thing I'll mention is that if you want certain shadows to be lighter than others, you can also play with the opacity value. So you can make that shadow less strong or more strong, and that will change kind of the look of the color as well. And next I'm just going to mention that in addition to like these normal like flat fills, if you want to explore gradients, you can also do that. So if you select any of your fill colors or shadow colors, and then go to the color picker, you will see at the top that it says, it has a little drop down. It says color fill here, and then there's actually other options. So there's linear gradient, radial gradient, angular gradient, texture fill, noise, background fill. So a bunch of different options there. So if I do, for example, a linear gradient, you can see that it creates like a blend between two colors. And you can pick those colors in using these little sliders underneath. So you click the little slider itself, and then you can adjust the color that slider is set to. So you can pick if there's a particular gradient or color that would fit your image better. I could play around with maybe a radial gradient for my goldfish here, but I don't want him that dark. Oh, maybe I'll give him a little bit of a blue glow. Why not? All right, so you can have some fun with that. The other thing you can do is by default, your shadows will be set to kind of like normal blending modes. If you want to see what the other ones do, you can do like multiplies. It will like change exactly how the shadow interacts with the layers underneath it. So if you want a bit of a different effect in terms of what color it's overlapping, you can play around with the blending value of your fills as well. If they're overlapped on top of another color, it will change that. All right, so you can play around and give it whatever colors or fills you want. And basically create a different look depending on how you want to color it. All right, and basically when you think you're done and you've got some color fills and shadows, um, zoom out, take a look at how it is working, and fix anything you want to fix. And then at this point, you can go to your image that's your background sketch, and you can turn that off or take it out. Just turning off the little visibility thing is fine. You just want to make it so it's no longer visible there. And double check all your layers that those are kind of okay. And then make sure you save. So remember your main like local file save is the one you should always kind of keep updated. And I'm going to call this Max the Goldfish, but you can also call it like Vector Cartoon. And then when you're ready to submit the file to your Dropbox on D2L, go File, Export, PNG. Again, give it a descriptive name. Save, and then that's the file you'll be uploading. Alright, so thanks for sticking around for the tutorial. There'll be more coming.